Alexander Wyatt adjusted the thick-rimmed glasses on his face, the lenses just large enough to distort his piercing blue eyes into something unremarkable. He looked again at his reflection in the grimy restroom mirror of a roadside diner. Hair dyed an unflattering chestnut brown, scruff on his jawline unevenly groomed, and his usually crisp posture now slouched as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. The designer suit he once wore every day was replaced with faded jeans and a second-hand flannel shirt. To everyone else, he wasn't Alex Wyatt, tech mogul and billionaire entrepreneur. He was just Eli Winter, a 32-year-old man desperate for a barista job at a struggling cafe. He ran a hand over his face, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. "What if they recognize me?" he muttered under his breath. Then, scoffing at the idea, he added, "As if anyone in that place cares enough to notice." This wasn't how he imagined the legacy of Harvest Grounds, the coffeehouse empire he had poured his heart into building. He thought his dream of ethical, sustainable, and innovative coffee shops would flourish. Instead, he'd watched from his corner office as complaints about poor service and unethical practices flooded in over the past year. His trusted managers promised him the numbers were under control, yet profits dwindled, staff turnover spiked, and the once loyal customer base began slipping away. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to find them sitting behind a desk. With one last glance in the mirror, Alex pulled the strap of his worn backpack over his shoulder and headed toward Harvest Grounds, downtown Seattle location. The air was damp, heavy with the city's constant drizzle, but it felt fitting for the mood. A light flickered above the cafe's green and white sign, where the slogan beneath "Fresh Ideas, Fresh Brews" seemed less like a promise and more like a cruel joke. The door jingled as Alex entered, the warmth of the cafe enveloping him in the comforting aroma of coffee beans and baked goods. It was a sharp contrast to the tension humming in the air. Behind the counter, a harried young woman balanced 3 drink orders while fumbling with a temperamental espresso machine. "Order up!" she barked, barely glancing at the customers waiting impatiently for their names to be called. Her voice carried both authority and exhaustion, and Alex guessed she was the closest thing to a leader this place had. "Hey, you!" Another voice snapped him out of his observations. A burly man with a scruffy beard and a stained apron approached from the side, clipboard in hand. His name tag read, Jake-Manager. "You're the new guy, right? Eli something?" Jake didn't wait for confirmation. "Good. Follow me." Jake led Alex through a narrow hallway into a cramped back office, cluttered with paperwork and boxes of supplies. The smell of stale coffee lingered in the air. "Here's the deal," Jake said, dropping into a worn swivel chair. "I don't have time to babysit. You clock in, you work hard, you don't screw up. Got it?" "Got it," Alex replied, keeping his tone even. He didn't need Jake's approval, just his access. Jake handed him a worn, laminated sheet with a basic schedule and training instructions. "You'll shadow Liv today. She's the head barista, knows her stuff. Don't piss her off, and we won't have a problem." "Understood," Alex said, tucking the sheet into his pocket. Jake didn't even glance at him again, already absorbed in a phone call that sounded suspiciously like an argument about money. Alex found Liv at the espresso machine, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she prepared a complicated order. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, a few strands escaping to frame her tired but determined face. "Are you Eli?" she asked without looking up. "That's me," he replied, stepping closer. "Great." Her tone was clipped, but not unfriendly. "First lesson, stay out of my way. Second lesson, if you see something broken, don't ask if we can fix it. We can't. Just work around it." "Noted," Alex said, hiding a small smile. Liv handed him a rag and pointed toward the tables. Start with cleanup, and don't miss the corners. Customers notice. As Alex wiped tables, he observed the dynamics of the cafe. Liv clearly carried the team, stepping in whenever an order went wrong or a customer became difficult. Ethan, a college-age dishwasher, moved with nervous energy, trying to keep up with the pile of mugs and plates that seemed to grow faster than he could manage. Sandra, a sharp-tongued shift leader, argued with Jake near the supply closet about overtime hours. "You're lucky I even showed up today," Sandra snapped. "This place would fall apart without me." Jake waved her off dismissively. "Clock out if you've got a problem, Sandra. Plenty of people need jobs right now." Alex's hands tightened around the rag. He'd heard too many stories like this. Workers pushed to their limits, their voices ignored. Later, during a rare lull, Alex sat at a table in the back corner, his muscles already aching from the unfamiliar work. Liv joined him, plopping into a chair with a huff. "So," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "What's your story, Eli? You're not one of those wannabe writers working at a cafe for inspiration, are you?" Alex chuckled softly. "No, nothing like that. Just needed a fresh start." Liv studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Just don't flake on us. Jake may be an ass, but this place barely runs as it is." "I've noticed," Alex said carefully. "Doesn't seem like anyone here has much support." Liv's eyes darkened. "Support? That's a luxury around here. Equipment's falling apart, schedules change last minute, and don't get me started on overtime pay or lack of it." "Why stay?" Alex asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, then shrugged. "I guess I still believe in what this place could be. It's not the coffee, it's the people. Customers come in every day looking for a little joy, a little connection. I try to give them that, even if the higher-ups couldn't care less." Before Alex could respond, the door jingled again, and a sharply dressed man with an air of arrogance stepped inside. Liv stiffened immediately. "Great. Just what we needed," she muttered. "Who is he?" Alex asked. "Chuck Rollins, regional manager. He doesn't show up unless something's about to go very wrong." Chuck scanned the room with a smirk before heading toward the counter. Jake appeared from the back, his demeanor suddenly deferential. "Chuck?" Jake greeted him nervously. "Didn't expect you today." "That's the problem, Jake," Chuck replied smoothly. "You never expect me. Let's talk." As the two disappeared into the office, Liv sighed. "Mark my words, nothing good comes from his visits." Alex nodded, his mind already spinning. Whatever was wrong with Harvest Grounds, it wasn't just this location, and if he wanted to save it, he'd need to dig a lot deeper. The day ended with Alex nursing sore muscles and a growing sense of purpose. As he walked home through the rain, he replayed the events in his mind: Jake's evasiveness, Chuck's smugness, and Liv's quiet resilience. He had come here to find answers. What he found instead were people worth fighting for. And tomorrow, he would start doing just that. The next morning, Alex walked into Harvest Grounds with a renewed determination. The sun hadn't yet risen over Seattle, and the cafe was bathed in the soft glow of its dim interior lights. The clinking of dishes and the low hum of the espresso machine broke the stillness. Alex adjusted his apron and made his way behind the counter, nodding at Liv, who was already prepping syrups and calibrating the grinder with the precision of a master. "Good, you're on time," Liv said, glancing up from her task. "Not that Jake cares about punctuality, unless it's his coffee break." Alex chuckled faintly, though his mind lingered on the tense exchange between Jake and Chuck yesterday. He hadn't had a chance to probe deeper, but he was sure there was more to their conversation than Jake would admit. "Morning rush is about to hit," Liv continued, her tone brisk but not unkind. "I'll handle the orders. You stick to lattes and cappuccinos. And for the love of everything, don't mess up the milk froth. Customers can tell. Got it, Alex said, sliding into place beside her. As Liv predicted, the cafe filled quickly. The register beeped incessantly as orders piled up, a constant barrage of grande, extra shot, and non-dairy modifiers that even Alex's sharp mind struggled to keep up with. Soy latte, extra foam, Liv called, sliding the cup toward Alex. Move it, Eli. I'm on it, Alex replied, grabbing the pitcher and pouring the steamed milk with practiced care. He'd spent hours the previous night watching latte art tutorials, determined not to embarrass himself today. Behind them, Ethan frantically cleared dishes, his wiry frame nearly knocking over a precarious stack of cups. Ethan! Liv shouted, not unkindly. Careful with those. We're down to our last clean mugs. Sorry, Ethan stammered, his face flushing as he darted into the kitchen. Alex couldn't help but feel for the kid. From the looks of it, Ethan was juggling more than just dishes. The line stretched to the door, and the tension grew thicker with each passing minute. A middle-aged man in a suit impatiently drummed his fingers on the counter. Excuse me, the man barked. How long does it take to make one caramel macchiato? Liv turned, her smile tight and forced. We're working as fast as we can, sir. Thank you for your patience. Patience? The man snapped. I've been waiting 10 minutes. This is supposed to be fast service. Alex felt his jaw tighten as he handed off the finished latte. Your macchiato is next, sir, he said evenly, keeping his frustration in check. Liv mouthed a quiet thank you before focusing on the next order. The moment passed, but the strain it left lingered like the smell of burnt coffee grounds. By mid-morning, the rush began to die down, and the team caught their breath. Alex wiped down the counter, his arms aching from the repetitive motions, but his mind was sharper than ever. He'd seen cracks, small but telling, in the way the cafe operated. Liv slumped into a chair near the back, exhaling loudly. Every day feels like running a marathon with no finish line. Alex sat across from her, wiping his hands on a towel. Why does it have to be like this? It seems like there are better ways to manage all this chaos. Liv gave him a weary look. You think I haven't tried? Jake doesn't listen. And Chuck? He's worse. All they care about is numbers, cutting costs, hitting quotas. Meanwhile, we're the ones dealing with broken machines and angry customers. Doesn't corporate step in? Alex asked, though he already knew the answer. Liv scoffed. Corporate doesn't care about us. We're just another location on their spreadsheet. The frustration in her voice was palpable, and Alex felt a pang of guilt. He had built this company with the promise of fairness and innovation, but somewhere along the way, it had become something unrecognizable. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices near the back office. Sandra stormed out, her cheeks flushed with anger. Unbelievable! She spat, throwing her hands in the air. What happened? Liv asked. Sandra crossed her arms, her voice tight with controlled fury. Jake's cutting my hours again, says it's to balance the budget, but we all know he's pocketing the difference. Are you sure? Alex asked carefully. Sandra shot him a sharp look. Of course I'm sure. I've seen him fudge the numbers before, but good luck proving it. The guy's like Teflon. Nothing sticks. Liv sighed, her expression a mix of sympathy and resignation. I'm sorry, Sandra, that's not fair. Sandra's eyes narrowed. Fair? Liv? This whole place is a joke. If it weren't for my rent, I'd walk out and never look back. Alex watched as Sandra stomped toward the break room, her anger hanging in the air like a storm cloud. He knew she wasn't exaggerating. If Jake was skimming money, it was a bigger problem than anyone here realized. By the afternoon, the cafe settled into its usual rhythm. Alex took the opportunity to slip into the supply room under the guise of restocking. He found the small desk where Jake often worked, cluttered with receipts, order forms, and a half-eaten bagel. As Alex rifled through the papers, a folded envelope caught his eye. He opened it cautiously, scanning the contents. It was a memo addressed to Jake from Chuck, detailing an unexplained transfer of funds between locations. Budget reallocation, Alex muttered under his breath, his brow furrowing. The numbers didn't add up, and the vague language was a red flag. Before he could dig further, the door creaked open, and Jake's voice cut through the air. "What the hell are you doing?" Alex froze, the envelope still in his hand. Jake's eyes darted to the desk, then back to Alex, his expression hardening. "I was, looking for more inventory sheets," Alex said quickly, slipping the envelope back onto the pile. Jake stepped closer, his presence looming. "Stay out of my stuff, Winter. Your job is out there, not in here." "Understood," Alex said, keeping his tone neutral. Jake stared him down for another moment before turning and slamming the door behind him. Alex exhaled, his heart pounding. As he returned to the counter, Liv gave him a curious look. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," Alex said, forcing a smile. "Just Jake being Jake." But inside, he knew the truth was far more complicated and dangerous. Whatever Jake and Chuck were hiding, it was bigger than he'd anticipated. And if he wasn't careful, it could unravel everything. Later that evening, as the cafe emptied out and the team cleaned up, Alex lingered near Liv. "Do you ever wonder if things could change?" he asked quietly. Liv paused, her hands stilling over a stack of mugs. "I used to. But now? I don't know. It feels like the people in charge don't want it to." Alex nodded, a spark of determination igniting in his chest. Maybe they just need someone to show them how. Liv gave him a faint smile, but her eyes were tired. "Good luck with that." As Alex stepped out into the cool night air, he replayed the day in his mind. He had seen enough to know that change wasn't just necessary, it was urgent. The question was whether he could pull it off without blowing his cover. And as he walked away, the faint glow of the cafe's flickering sign behind him, Alex knew the clock was already ticking. The cafe buzzed with life the next morning as Alex stepped in, the soft glow of sunrise spilling through the large windows. Liv was already at the counter setting up the day's brews. She didn't even look up as she called out, "Eli, grab the dish bin. Ethan's running late and I'm not starting the morning with a sink full of dirty cups." "On it," Alex said, rolling up his sleeves. He took a deep breath, letting the familiar scent of coffee beans ground him. This had become his new normal, at least for now. But beneath the hum of grinders and the gentle chatter of early customers, the tension simmered. Sandra was at the register, her usual sharpness on display, as she wrangled customers who had clearly skipped their morning patience along with their first coffee. "No, Mum, I can't make your chai latte extra hot, but not too hot." "That's not how physics works," Sandra said, her smile barely masking her irritation. Alex couldn't help but chuckle as he passed her, but his amusement was short-lived. His mind wandered to Jake's cryptic warning yesterday. Jake's reaction had been almost too defensive, and Alex was sure the memo he'd found was part of a much larger problem. The challenge now was figuring out how far the corruption stretched, and how he could stop it. Liv interrupted his thoughts. "Daydreaming already, Eli? You're in for a rude awakening once the rush hits." He gave her a quick nod, just mentally preparing. "Good luck with that," Liv smirked, handing him a fresh order. "You'll need it." The rush came in waves, leaving no time for conversation. Alex worked the steam wand like a pro, grateful that his hours of practice had paid off. He wasn't just blending into the team anymore, he was becoming part of it. He caught Sandra's eye during a lull, and she gave him an approving nod. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small victory. By mid-morning, the line finally began to thin. Alex wiped his forehead with his sleeve, glancing at Liv, who was stacking cups with practiced efficiency. "Hey, Liv," he began cautiously, not wanting to disrupt her flow. "Do you know much about Chuck, the regional manager?" She stopped mid-motion, her brows knitting together. "Why do you ask?" Alex hesitated. "Just curious. He seemed intense yesterday." Liv scoffed. "Intense is one word for it. Try manipulative, arrogant, and completely out of touch. Chuck only shows up when something's wrong or when he wants to throw his weight around. He doesn't care about us, just his precious bottom line." Sandra chimed in from the other end of the counter. "He's Jake's golden boy. They scratch each other's backs, you know. Jake covers for Chuck's shady crap, and Chuck keeps Jake in his job. It's a cycle of dysfunction." Alex leaned closer. "What kind of shady crap?" Sandra's lips pressed into a thin line. "Nothing I can prove. But if you've worked here long enough, you start noticing things. Missing inventory, sudden budget cuts, hours disappearing from payroll. It all stinks, but Jake has a way of making you feel crazy for even questioning it." Liv nodded in agreement. "She's right. I've been here 3 years, and it's only gotten worse. But what can we do? They've got all the power." Alex's jaw tightened. He couldn't let this go on, but his cover limited how much he could act. For now, he needed more information. "Thanks for the heads up," he said. "I'll keep my eyes open." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "You're brave if you think you can take them on. Just don't get caught. Jake's got a short fuse, and Chuck? He's worse." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Jake stormed out of the back office, his face flushed with frustration. He barked at Ethan, who had just arrived, his shoulders slumped and a guilty look on his face. "You're late, again," Jake snapped. "That's coming out of your paycheck." "I'm sorry," Ethan mumbled. "The bus." "Save it," Jake interrupted. "Just get to work." Alex felt a flash of anger as he watched Ethan scurry off to the dish pit. He couldn't stand the way Jake treated the staff, but he bit his tongue. Calling Jake out now would only blow his cover. Instead, he focused on his next task, filing the exchange away for later. The day passed in a blur, but Alex's thoughts remained sharp. Every interaction, every detail seemed to confirm what he already suspected. Chuck and Jake were up to something big, and it was bleeding the cafe dry. He needed proof, but he couldn't do it alone. That evening, after closing, Alex caught Liv as she was wiping down the counters. "Liv, can I ask you something?" She glanced up, a curious look in her eyes. "What's on your mind?" Alex hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "What would you do if you knew something shady was going on here? Like really shady?" Liv straightened, her expression cautious. "Are you saying you found something?" "Not exactly," Alex said quickly. "Just a feeling. But if I did, how would you handle it?" She frowned, considering. "Honestly, I'd probably keep my head down. You've seen how Jake reacts to even a hint of defiance. And Chuck? He's untouchable. You'd have to have ironclad proof to even think about taking them on." "Yeah, that's what I figured," Alex said, masking his disappointment. Liv studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Look, Eli, if you're thinking about poking the bear, just be careful, okay? I've seen people try before, and it never ends well." "Thanks, Liv," Alex said, offering a small smile. "I'll keep that in mind." As he left the cafe, Alex felt the weight of her warning. He knew the risks, but he couldn't let fear stop him. The team deserved better, and if no one else was willing to fight for them, he would. The next day brought more questions than answers. Sandra cornered him during their shift, her voice low and urgent. "Eli, I need to show you something," she said, glancing over her shoulder to make sure Jake wasn't nearby. "What is it?" Alex asked, his pulse quickening. "Not here. Meet me in the supply room after closing," she whispered, then walked away before he could respond. The hours dragged as Alex waited for the end of the shift. When the cafe finally emptied, he slipped into the supply room where Sandra was waiting with a stack of papers. "Look at this," she said, thrusting them into his hands. Alex scanned the documents, his eyes widening. They were invoices for supplies, way more than the cafe could possibly need. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "Why would Jake order so much?" Sandra smirked. "Because he's not. He's ordering extra, then returning it to a fake vendor and pocketing the refunds. Chuck's in on it too. It's a whole racket." Alex's heart raced. This was the break he needed, but it also raised the stakes. If Jake and Chuck found out Sandra had these documents, or that he was digging into them, it wouldn't just be their jobs on the line, it could be much worse. "What do we do with this?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sandra's eyes narrowed. "We take them down, but we need a plan." Alex nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. This was it, the point of no return. Together, they were about to start a fight that would change everything. The supply room felt claustrophobic, the air heavy with the smell of cardboard and stale coffee grounds. Alex leaned against the door, gripping the stack of invoices Sandra had handed him. His mind raced as he pieced together the implications of what he held. The fake vendors, the inflated invoices, this was the proof he needed. But it also painted a target squarely on his back. Sandra crossed her arms, her expression a mix of defiance and unease. "So what's the plan, Eli? You wanted answers and now you've got them. But I'm telling you right now, if Jake or Chuck find out about this, we're done for." Alex met her gaze, his jaw tightening. "We can't just sit on this. They're stealing from the company, from all of us. It's more than just numbers. It's why everything here is falling apart." Sandra let out a sharp breath, pacing in the small space. "Yeah, and if you think confronting Jake head-on is the answer, you've clearly never dealt with a guy like him. He's slimy, Eli. He'll find a way to pin this on us." "I'm not planning to confront him," Alex said firmly. "Not yet." "Then what?" Sandra stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "You're the one always asking questions. Tell me what we're supposed to do with this." Alex hesitated. The truth hovered on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't tell her who he really was. Not yet. If Sandra knew he was the owner of Harvest Grounds, everything between them would change. Right now she saw him as an ally, someone willing to fight alongside her. He couldn't risk losing that trust. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted, "but I know we can't let this slide. Let me handle this, Sandra. I'll figure something out." Her eyes flickered with doubt, but after a moment she nodded. "Fine, but don't expect me to sit around waiting for a miracle. If you're not ready to act, I will be." Alex swallowed hard as Sandra pushed past him, leaving the supply room in tense silence. He stared at the stack of papers in his hands, feeling the weight of the responsibility they carried. The stakes had never been higher. The next morning, Alex arrived early, hoping to get a few moments of peace before the chaos of the day began. Liv was already there, her face lit by the glow of the espresso machine. She glanced at him as he walked in, her usual briskness softened by a rare smile. "Early today, huh?" she said, handing him a steaming cup of coffee. "Let me guess, couldn't sleep?" "Something like that," Alex replied, taking the cup gratefully. Liv studied him for a moment, her expression shifting to concern. "You've been quieter lately. What's going on?" Alex hesitated. Liv had always been perceptive, and her ability to read people was part of what made her such a good leader, unofficial though her title might be. But he couldn't drag her into this mess. Not yet. "Just adjusting, I guess," he said finally. "This place can be a lot." Liv chuckled softly, nodding. "Yeah, it can. But you're holding your own. That's more than I can say for most of the people Jake hires." "Thanks," Alex said, meaning it. He sipped his coffee, letting the moment linger before the day swept them both away. By mid-morning, the cafe was in full swing. The line stretched to the door, and the team moved like clockwork, each person falling into their rhythm. Alex focused on the orders in front of him, but his mind wandered back to the invoices. He needed a way to expose Jake and Chuck without putting the team at risk. Then, as if on cue, Jake's voice cut through the hum of the cafe. "Liv! Eli! Break room now!" Alex exchanged a glance with Liv, whose brow furrowed in confusion. They followed Jake to the back, where Sandra was already waiting, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Jake slammed the door shut behind them, his face red with anger. "Care to explain this?" he demanded, holding up one of the invoices Alex had seen the night before. Alex's stomach dropped. How had Jake found out? Liv looked genuinely bewildered. "Explain what? It's an invoice." "Exactly," Jake snapped. "And yet somehow it's missing from the system. Care to tell me why?" Sandra's jaw tightened, and Alex could see the fire in her eyes. But she stayed silent, clearly weighing her options. "I'm not sure what you're getting at," Liv said carefully. "But I've been too busy running this cafe to mess with paperwork." Jake sneered. "You've always got an excuse, don't you, Liv? Maybe I should start looking for someone who takes their job seriously." "That's rich coming from you," Sandra shot back. "Maybe if you spent less time in your office and more time actually helping, we wouldn't be drowning every shift." Jake turned on her, his voice rising. "Watch your mouth, Sandra. You're already on thin ice." "Enough!" Alex's voice cut through the tension, surprising even himself. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to him. "Jake, if something's missing, maybe it's because you're too busy yelling at us to notice what's actually going on," Alex said, his voice steady but firm. "We're all doing our best to keep this place running, and frankly, we could use a little more support and a lot less blame." For a moment, Jake looked stunned, as if no one had ever dared to speak to him that way. Then his expression hardened. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you, Winter? Let me make one thing clear. You're replaceable. All of you are." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. "Well," Sandra said after a beat, her tone laced with sarcasm. "That went well." Liv sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. "This is getting out of hand. Jake's more unhinged than usual." "Because he's scared," Alex said, his mind racing. "He knows something's about to come to light, and he's trying to cover his tracks." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "And you know this how?" Alex hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Let's just say I've seen enough to know he's hiding something. And if we can prove it, we might actually have a shot at fixing this mess." Liv looked at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. "Are you sure about this, Eli? If you go after Jake and Chuck, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," Alex said firmly, "but I can't do it alone." Sandra smirked. "Well, you've got me. I've been waiting for someone to grow a spine around here." Liv hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'm in. But if we're doing this, we need a plan." Alex's chest tightened with a mix of relief and anticipation. For the first time, he wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they might actually stand a chance. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but Alex's mind was sharper than ever. He could feel the pieces falling into place, each conversation, each moment bringing him closer to the truth. That night, as he walked home, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, he felt the weight of what lay ahead. This wasn't just about a few bad invoices or a corrupt manager. It was about standing up for the people who made Harvest Grounds what it was, and he wasn't going to let them down. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The morning began with a heavy stillness that Alex couldn't shake. He arrived at the cafe early. the city still cloaked in grey, its hum of life muted. The usual scent of brewing coffee felt more like a veil than a comfort today. He adjusted his apron, trying to channel his nerves into focus. The cafe seemed quieter than usual, as though even the walls could sense the tension brewing beneath the surface. Sandra arrived next, her movements sharp and purposeful. She didn't say much, just gave Alex a knowing nod as she began organizing the register. Liv came in not long after, her face shadowed with worry. She caught Alex's eye as she dropped her bag on the counter. "Any updates?" "Not yet," Alex said, keeping his voice low. "But I've been thinking, if we want to expose Jake and Chuck, we need more than just invoices. We need to show how their actions have impacted everyone here." Liv folded her arms, leaning against the counter. "So, what are you suggesting? A full exposé?" "Something like that," Alex said. "But first, we need the staff on board. They need to know what's at stake." Sandra walked over, her brow furrowed. "You think everyone's going to stand up to Jake? Half the team's too scared to even look him in the eye." Alex nodded. "I get that, but we don't need everyone. Just enough voices to make it impossible for them to ignore us." Liv hesitated, then sighed. "All right, but if this blows up, it's on you, Eli." The door chimed as Ethan walked in, his usual slouch even more pronounced. He rubbed the back of his neck, muttering a quiet, "Morning?" before disappearing into the kitchen. Alex watched him go, a pang of guilt tightening his chest. Ethan was exactly the kind of person Jake and Chuck's schemes were hurting, overworked, underappreciated, and barely hanging on. As the day wore on, the cafe filled with its usual crowd of regulars and newcomers, the rhythm of orders and conversations felt oddly mechanical, as though everyone was going through the motions. But beneath the surface, Alex's mind raced. He caught glances of Jake pacing in the back office, phone in hand, his expression a storm of frustration. Whatever Jake was dealing with, it was clear the pressure was mounting. By mid-afternoon, Alex had seen enough. He motioned to Sandra and Liv, pulling them into the break room during a lull. "We need to talk to Ethan," Alex said. "He's sharp and he knows his way around tech. If anyone can help us dig deeper, it's him." Sandra arched an eyebrow. "Ethan? The kid who drops mugs every other shift?" "Exactly," Alex said. "He's smarter than he lets on. Trust me." Liv glanced toward the door, then nodded. "All right, but we need to be careful. Jake's already on edge." Sandra smirked. "When isn't he?" Later, as the cafe emptied out and the evening approached, Alex found Ethan stacking cups in the kitchen. "Hey, Ethan," Alex said, keeping his tone casual. "Got a minute?" Ethan glanced up, his eyes wary. Sure. What's up?" Alex leaned against the counter, lowering his voice. "I need your help with something. It's sensitive." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Sensitive how?" Alex hesitated, then decided to take the leap. "Jake and Chuck. I think they're stealing from the company, and I think you might be the only person who can help us prove it." Ethan froze, his hand gripping a mug mid-stack. "Wait, what? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," Alex said. "Sandra and I found some documents that don't add up, but we need to dig deeper, and we don't have the tools. You do." Ethan's eyes darted around the room, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You know what Jake will do if he finds out we're even talking about this, right?" Alex nodded. "I know. But think about it, Ethan. How many times has Jake shorted your hours? How many times have you had to pick up the slack because we don't have enough staff? This isn't just about the cafe, it's about all of us." Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "All right, but if this goes south, I'm out. I can't afford to lose this job." "Fair enough," Alex said, relief washing over him. "We'll keep it quiet." That night, after the cafe closed, the three of them gathered around a laptop in the break room. Ethan's fingers flew across the keyboard as he accessed the cafe's internal systems. "This is insane," he muttered, his eyes scanning the screen. "They've been manipulating inventory logs for months. And look at this. There's a whole network of fake vendors tied to Chuck's account." Alex leaned over his shoulder, his stomach sinking as he read the data. It was worse than he'd thought. Chuck wasn't just skimming profits, he was siphoning funds from multiple locations. "This is it," Alex said, his voice steady but urgent. "This is the proof we need." Sandra leaned against the door, arms crossed. "So what now? We take this to corporate?" "Not yet," Alex said. "We need more than just numbers. We need people. If we go to corporate with this, we have to show them how it's affecting the staff." Ethan glanced up, his expression skeptical. "And how do you plan to do that?" "We talk to them," Alex said. "One by one. Get their stories, their frustrations. If we can show corporate that this is about more than just theft, they'll have to act." Sandra let out a low whistle. "You've got guts, Eli. I'll give you that." For the next week, Alex, Sandra, and Liv worked quietly, reaching out to their co-workers during breaks and after shifts. The stories they gathered were heartbreaking. "I can't even pay my rent this month," one barista confessed, tears in her eyes. "Jake cut my hours again." "They won't replace the broken dishwasher," Ethan said bitterly. "I have to do everything by hand, and I'm still behind on my schoolwork." "My mum's health insurance dropped me because I'm not getting enough hours," another worker said, her voice trembling with anger. Each story fueled Alex's determination. By the end of the week, they had enough testimonies to paint a damning picture of life at harvest grounds under Jake and Chuck's leadership. But they also knew the risk. Jake wasn't blind, and the tension in the cafe was impossible to ignore. He watched Alex and the others with growing suspicion, his sharp eyes following their every move. The breaking point came one evening when Jake burst into the break room, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, slamming the door behind him. Alex stood, meeting Jake's glare head-on. "We're trying to fix what you've broken." Jake's eyes narrowed, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you're some kind of hero, Winter? You're nothing but a replaceable cog in the machine." "Maybe," Alex said, his voice steady. "But cogs make the machine run, and without us, you've got nothing." Jake took a step closer, his fists clenched. "You're going to regret this." Alex didn't flinch. "Maybe, but not as much as you will." The room fell silent, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on them. But in that moment, Alex knew there was no turning back. The fight for harvest grounds had truly begun. The cafe buzzed with an uneasy energy the next morning. Alex felt it the moment he walked in, a tension that hung in the air like the faint scent of burnt coffee. Jake's furious outburst the night before had left its mark, and though no one spoke of it openly, everyone moved a little more cautiously, their glances quicker, their words quieter. Liv was already behind the counter, arranging cups with methodical precision. When Alex approached, she didn't look up. "How bad do you think it's going to get?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex sighed, adjusting his apron. "Worse before it gets better, but we're not backing down." Liv paused, her hand hovering over the stack of lids. She turned to face him, her dark eyes sharp. "You realize he's not just going to let this go, right? Jake's dangerous when he's cornered." "I know," Alex said evenly. "That's why we need to be careful. Stick to the plan." Sandra joined them moments later, her expression defiant as always. "Careful? If you ask me, it's time to stop playing defense and start hitting back. Jake's a bully, and the only way to deal with bullies is to punch first." Liv shot her a look. "And risk all of us getting fired. Great plan, Sandra." "It's not about starting a fight," Alex interjected, his tone calm but firm. "It's about finishing one. We've got the stories, the numbers, and the evidence. Now we need to push it where it counts." "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Sandra asked, crossing her arms. "Corporate barely knows we exist, and Chuck's got them wrapped around his finger." Alex hesitated, his mind racing. He'd been so focused on gathering proof, he hadn't fully thought through the next step. But before he could answer, the door to the cafe opened, and the morning rush swept in like a tidal wave. "Later," Alex said quickly. "For now, let's just survive the day." The hours blurred into a whirlwind of orders, complaints, and clattering dishes. Alex fell into the rhythm of his work, but his mind remained elsewhere. Every time he glimpsed Jake pacing near the back office or caught Chuck's name muttered in passing, his resolve hardened. They were running out of time. By early afternoon, the cafe quieted down, and Alex found Ethan in the kitchen, scrubbing a mountain of dishes. "Hey," Alex said, stepping closer. "Got a minute?" Ethan glanced up, his hands dripping with soapy water. "What's up?" "We need to talk about next steps," Alex said. "Sandra thinks we should take the fight to corporate. Liv thinks we should wait. What do you think?" Ethan frowned, wiping his hands on a towel. "Honestly, I think we're out of our league. Corporate's not going to care about a few sob stories and some missing money. They care about profits." "Exactly," Alex said. "That's why we need to show them how this is hurting the company long term. Not just the staff, but the brand, the customer loyalty, everything." Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay, but how do we even get their attention? Chuck controls everything that goes up the chain. If we send them anything, he'll bury it before it gets to the top." Alex's jaw tightened. He hated how right Ethan was, but the truth only made his determination stronger. "We'll find a way," Alex said. "We have to." Ethan sighed, then picked up a plate and resumed scrubbing. "Well, if you need me to hack something, let me know." Alex smiled faintly. "Thanks, Ethan. I might take you up on that." Later that evening, after the cafe closed, Alex gathered Liv, Sandra, and Ethan in the break room. The tension was palpable, each of them bracing for the fallout of what they were about to do. "All right," Alex began, spreading out the documents they'd collected on the table. "This is everything we have. The fake invoices, the payroll discrepancies, the staff testimonies. If we can get this to someone higher up than Chuck, we've got a chance." "And how exactly do we do that?" Sandra asked, leaning back in her chair. "You're not suggesting we just walk into corporate headquarters, are you?" "Not quite," Alex said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But I do have an idea." He pulled out his phone and opened an email draft. "Harvest Grounds has a public email for corporate inquiries. It's mostly for PR stuff, but I know for a fact that the CEO occasionally checks it personally. If we send everything there, there's a chance it'll get through." "A chance?" Liv echoed, her skepticism clear. "That's a pretty big gamble." "It's the best shot we've got," Alex said, "unless anyone has a better idea." The room fell silent, the weight of the decision settling over them. Finally, Sandra spoke. "All right," she said. "Let's do it." The others nodded, and Alex began attaching the files to the email. He hesitated for a moment before typing the subject line: "Urgent, corruption and mismanagement at Harvest Grounds." "Here goes nothing," he muttered, hitting send. The next morning, Alex arrived at the cafe earlier than usual, his nerves frayed. Liv was already there, her face etched with worry. "Any word?" she asked as soon as he walked in. Alex shook his head. "Nothing yet, but it's only been a few hours." Sandra arrived not long after, her expression as fiery as ever. "If they don't respond by the end of the day, we go to the press. Let's see how Chuck likes being in the headlines." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," Alex said, "but I agree. If corporate won't listen, we'll find someone who will." The day passed in a blur, every sound and movement amplified by the tension hanging over them. Alex kept checking his phone, half expecting Jake to burst out of the back office at any moment with an accusation or a threat. By late afternoon, Alex's phone buzzed and he snatched it up, his heart pounding. It was an email reply. The subject line read, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention." "What is it?" Liv asked, noticing the change in his expression. Alex read the email aloud, his voice steady but tinged with hope. "Dear team member, thank you for your detailed submission. We take these matters very seriously and will begin an investigation immediately. Please expect follow-up communication soon." Sandra let out a low whistle. "Looks like we've got their attention." Liv smiled, a flicker of relief breaking through her worry. That's a start. But Alex's mind remained sharp, his focus unwavering. They had taken the first step, but the fight was far from over. If corporate was truly going to investigate, they would need to brace for whatever came next. As the sun set over the city, Alex stood outside the cafe, watching the lights of downtown Seattle twinkle in the distance. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. They were making progress, slow, hard-fought progress, but it was enough to keep going. He turned back toward the cafe, determination etched into his every step. This wasn't just about saving a business, it was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. And Alex was ready for whatever came next. The email from corporate had been a glimmer of hope, but it did little to ease the growing tension at the cafe. Alex knew this was only the beginning. An investigation meant scrutiny, on everyone. And the more they dug into Jake and Chuck, the closer they'd get to uncovering Alex's secret. For now, though, he needed to focus on keeping the team together. They were his greatest asset, and they'd need each other more than ever. The morning rush hit like clockwork, but the mood in the cafe was far from routine. Liv worked silently at the espresso machine, her usual sharp efficiency softened by a hint of nervousness. Sandra's movements were quick and deliberate as she handled the register, her jaw tight and her gaze darting toward the back office every so often. Ethan stayed out of sight, buried in the kitchen, avoiding Jake's presence altogether. Jake, for his part, had been unusually quiet since the email had been sent. But his silence wasn't comforting, it was calculating. Alex felt Jake's eyes on him more than once that morning, and each glance carried the weight of suspicion. By mid-morning, the cafe settled into a lull, the line thinning as the early crowd dispersed. Alex took the opportunity to pull Liv aside. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low. Liv shrugged, wiping down the counter. "Ask me again after corporate shows up. If they even bother." "They'll come," Alex said firmly. "We've given them too much to ignore." Liv sighed, glancing toward the back office. "I just hope we don't end up as collateral damage." "We won't," Alex said, meeting her gaze. "Not if we stick together." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the cafe door opening. Alex turned to see a man in a suit step inside, his polished appearance and air of authority immediately setting him apart from the usual customers. He was followed by a woman in business casual attire, holding a tablet. Sandra leaned over the counter, whispering to Alex. "Let me guess. Corporate?" "Looks like it," Alex muttered. The man approached the counter, flashing a tight smile. "Good morning. I'm Mr. Coleman, Head of Operations. This is Ms. Rivera from Compliance. We're here to conduct a site review." Sandra's smile didn't reach her eyes. What a pleasant surprise. Coleman ignored her tone, glancing around the cafe. "We'll need access to your records, and we'll be speaking with all staff individually. Where's your manager?" Liv motioned toward the back office. "Jake's in there." "Of course he is," Sandra muttered under her breath. Coleman and Rivera moved toward the office, disappearing behind the door. The tension in the room thickened, and Alex could feel the weight of unspoken thoughts pressing down on everyone. "What now?" Ethan asked, emerging cautiously from the kitchen. "Now we wait," Alex said. But his gut told him it wouldn't be a passive wait. An hour later, the back office door opened and Jake stepped out, his face carefully blank. Coleman and Rivera followed, their expressions unreadable. "We'll begin with staff interviews," Coleman announced. "One at a time, please. Ms. Hayes, you're first." Liv hesitated, then set down her towel and followed them to the break room. Alex watched her go, his chest tight with apprehension. He had no idea how corporate would handle this, or how much they already knew. The minutes dragged by, each one a weight on Alex's nerves. Finally, Liv emerged, her face pale but composed. She glanced at Alex and Sandra, giving a subtle shake of her head. "Next," Coleman called. Ms. Patel Sandra squared her shoulders and strode toward the break room with her usual defiance. Alex couldn't help but admire her courage. "What do you think they're asking?" Ethan whispered. "Probably how we've been running things," Alex replied, though he suspected it went much deeper than that. By the time Sandra returned, her expression was unreadable. She walked straight past them, grabbing a cup of water and downing it in one go. "Well," Alex prompted. "They're digging," Sandra said, her voice low. "Asking about overtime, inventory, customer complaints, pretty much everything we've been talking about." "And?" Ethan asked nervously. "And they're not buying Jake's story," Sandra said, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. Alex felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the realization that his turn was coming. Sure enough, Coleman called his name moments later. Alex stepped into the break room, the door closing behind him with an ominous click. Coleman sat at the small table, his hands folded neatly. Rivera stood by the wall, tapping notes into her tablet. "Mr. Winter," Coleman began, his tone polite but firm. "Thank you for your cooperation. This won't take long." Alex nodded, sitting down. "Of course." Coleman studied him for a moment before speaking. "How long have you worked here?" "A little over a month," Alex replied. "And in that time, have you noticed anything unusual about the way this location is managed?" Alex hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've noticed some challenges. Equipment breaking down, inconsistent scheduling, that sort of thing." Coleman's gaze sharpened. "And what about the allegations regarding Mr. Chambers' handling of finances?" Alex kept his expression neutral. "I'm not in a position to know much about that. I just focus on doing my job." "Understandable," Coleman said, though his tone suggested otherwise. He glanced at Rivera, who nodded slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Winter," Coleman said, standing. "That will be all for now." Alex left the break room, his heart pounding. He could feel Rivera's eyes on him as he walked out, as though she were trying to read the thoughts he'd left unspoken. The rest of the day passed in a haze, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. By the time the cafe closed, everyone was on edge. "What do you think happens now?" Ethan asked as they cleaned up. "Hard to say," Liv replied, "but something tells me this isn't over." Sandra snorted. "You think?" "Jake's probably spinning some sob story right now, trying to save his own ass." Alex stayed quiet, his mind racing. The investigation was a step forward, but it was also a risk. If Jake or Chuck suspected him of being behind the email, it could blow his cover and everything they'd worked for. That night, as Alex walked home, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He glanced over his shoulder more than once, the shadows of the city pressing in around him. The fight wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore, it was about survival. Tomorrow, the stakes would be higher than ever, and Alex was ready to face them head on. The next morning, the air in the cafe felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Alex entered with his usual steady stride, but the unease gnawed at the edges of his focus. He scanned the room, taking in the subtle shifts in his co-workers' expressions. Liv looked unusually tense, her movements sharp as she prepared the espresso machine. Sandra leaned against the counter, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the back office door as if expecting Jake to emerge at any second. "Morning," Alex greeted quietly, dropping his bag by the register. Liv gave a small nod, barely glancing up. Sandra, however, smirked, though her tone was laced with sarcasm. "Morning, Eli. Ready to watch Jake implode today?" Alex forced a smile, though the weight in his chest didn't budge. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." "Hope's a nice thought," Sandra quipped, "but I wouldn't bet on it." The door chimed, signaling the arrival of the first wave of customers. The team fell into their routine, but it was clear their minds were elsewhere. Every so often, Alex caught Liv's gaze lingering on the break room door, her fingers drumming against the counter in an anxious rhythm. Ethan worked quietly in the kitchen, his usual nervous energy amplified. It wasn't long before Jake finally emerged, his face a storm cloud of barely concealed anger. He stalked toward the counter, his eyes locking onto Alex like a predator sizing up its prey. "Winter," Jake barked. "A word." Alex's stomach tightened, but he nodded, wiping his hands on his apron before following Jake to the back office. The door closed with a heavy click, cutting off the sounds of the cafe. Jake didn't sit. He loomed by the desk, his hands gripping the edge as though it was the only thing keeping him upright. His voice was low, but the venom in it was unmistakable. "You think I don't know what you're up to?" Alex met his glare head-on, his expression calm, despite the tension coiling in his chest. "I don't know what you mean." Jake slammed a fist onto the desk, the sound echoing in the small room. "Don't play dumb with me. You've been sniffing around, asking questions, stirring up trouble." Alex took a step forward, his voice steady. "I've been doing my job, Jake. Maybe if you focused on yours, we wouldn't be in this situation." Jake's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you don't know who you're dealing with." "Enlighten me," Alex said, his tone cool. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the one running scared." Jake's face flushed, his composure cracking. He straightened, pointing a finger at Alex. "You think you're smart, Winter? You think you're some kind of hero? Let me tell you something. Heroes don't last long around here." Before Alex could respond, the door opened and Liv stepped in. Her expression was a mixture of defiance and concern as her gaze darted between the two men. "Jake," she said firmly. "Coleman and Rivera are back. They want to see you." Jake froze, his anger momentarily replaced by a flicker of panic. He straightened his apron, brushing past Liv without another word. Alex caught the brief look she gave him, a silent question, and he nodded in reassurance. Once Jake was out of earshot, Liv turned to Alex. "What happened in here?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Alex said, though his voice betrayed the weight of the confrontation. "Jake's unraveling. He knows his time is up." Liv sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "I hope you're right." Hours later, the cafe buzzed with tension as Coleman and Rivera moved through the space, observing everything with hawk-like precision. They spoke with staff, examined inventory logs, and even questioned a few customers. Jake hovered in the background, his attempts at charm falling flat under Coleman's scrutinizing gaze. Sandra sidled up to Alex during a lull in the rush, her tone low. "They're not buying Jake's BS, but I don't think he's going down without a fight." "He won't have a choice," Alex said. "Not if we keep the pressure on." Sandra grinned. "You've got a knack for this, Winter. You ever think about running for office?" Alex chuckled softly, but his mind was already elsewhere. The investigation was progressing, but he knew they needed a tipping point, something that couldn't be ignored or explained away. That moment came unexpectedly late in the afternoon. Alex was restocking supplies in the kitchen when Ethan rushed in, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Alex!" Ethan hissed. "You need to see this." Alex followed him to the break room, where Ethan pulled out his laptop. "I was going through the cafe's shared drive, just trying to see if there was anything else that could help, and I found this." He clicked on a folder labeled Temp, opening a document that made Alex's blood run cold. It was a ledger, one that detailed payments to a vendor that didn't exist, signed off by none other than Chuck and Jake. "This is it," Alex muttered, his heart pounding. "This is the smoking gun." "We have to show Coleman," Ethan said, his voice urgent. "This proves everything." Alex nodded, but his mind raced. If they showed this now, there would be no turning back. Jake and Chuck would know exactly who had exposed them, but hesitation wasn't an option anymore. "Let's do it," Alex said. "Grab the file." They found Coleman and Rivera near the counter, speaking with Liv and Sandra. Alex stepped forward, holding the laptop like a shield. "Mr. Coleman," Alex said, "I think you'll want to see this." Coleman frowned, taking the laptop. As he read through the document, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to cold fury. He handed the device to Rivera, who quickly began taking notes. "Where did you find this?" Coleman demanded. "It was in the shared drive," Alex said. "It's real, and it's been going on for months." Coleman's gaze hardened, and he turned to Rivera. "Call HQ. I want a full audit of this location and all associated accounts, effective immediately." Jake chose that moment to step out of the back office, his confident facade cracking as he saw Coleman's expression. "What's going on?" Coleman's voice was ice. "Mr. Chambers, would you care to explain this?" He held up the laptop, the damning document displayed on the screen. Jake's face turned ashen, his mouth opening and closing without sound. I don't know what that is." "Don't insult my intelligence," Coleman snapped. "We've got enough evidence to shut this place down and press charges." Chuck's arrival at that exact moment only escalated the scene. He strode in, his usual air of smug superiority replaced by visible agitation. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded. Coleman turned to face him, his tone cutting. "It means your time is up, Mr. Rollins." The cafe fell silent as Chuck and Jake realized the game was over, and for the first time, Alex felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they had won. The cafe was silent for the first time in what felt like days. Jake and Chuck were gone, escorted out by Coleman and Rivera after a tense and public confrontation that left the entire team in stunned disbelief. Alex sat at one of the corner tables, his hands wrapped around a cup of cooling coffee. The day had been a storm, but now the quiet felt unnerving, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Liv joined him, sliding into the seat across the table. Her face was pale, her usual sharp energy muted by exhaustion. "Well," she said, breaking the silence. "That happened." Alex chuckled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "Yeah, and it's not over." Liv frowned, leaning closer. "What do you mean? We've got Coleman on our side now. Chuck and Jake are out. Isn't that what we wanted?" Alex shook his head. "It's a step, but you saw Jake's face. He's not going down without a fight. And Chuck? He's been playing this game for years. You think he doesn't have a backup plan?" Liv's brow furrowed as she absorbed his words. "So what do we do?" "We stay vigilant," Alex said. "This isn't just about them. It's about fixing everything they broke, and that's going to take time." Sandra approached, dropping into the seat beside Liv. Her fiery energy was still intact, but there was a hint of unease in her eyes. "Am I the only one who thought Coleman let them leave too easily? They should have been arrested." "They probably will be," Alex said, but corporate will want to handle it on their terms. It's not our call anymore. That's convenient, Sandra muttered, crossing her arms. They get to save face while we're the ones who had to deal with Jake's crap day after day. Alex nodded. I get it, but this is bigger than us now. Sandra sighed, leaning back in her chair. I just hope we don't end up getting screwed in the process. Not if we make sure we're heard, Alex said. This is our chance to change things. For good. Ethan poked his head out from the kitchen, his nervous energy palpable even from across the room. Are we safe now? Or should I be worried about Jake coming back with a vengeance? Sandra snorted. If he tries, I'll be ready. Alex smiled faintly. We'll all be ready. The conversation was cut short as the door opened, and Coleman stepped back into the cafe. His usual air of authority was tempered by something softer, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the team's efforts. Good evening, Coleman said, his tone measured. I wanted to thank you all for your cooperation today. What you've uncovered is significant. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Is that corporate speak for, you were right? Coleman's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. It's corporate speak for, you've made a difference. And we intend to follow through. Liv leaned forward, her voice cautious. What does that mean exactly? It means there will be changes, Coleman said. We're conducting a full audit of all regional operations. Chuck and Jake's actions have likely impacted more locations than just this one. You've exposed a systemic issue, and for that, we're grateful. But what about us? Sandra pressed. What happens to this cafe? To our jobs? Coleman hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the group. That's part of why I'm here. We're appointing a new regional manager to oversee operations, and there will be some temporary restructuring. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise it will be fair. Sandra didn't look entirely convinced, but Liv gave a small nod. Fair's a good start. More than fair, Alex said, his voice steady. This team deserves recognition for what they've endured and what they've accomplished. They've kept this place running despite everything. If corporate wants to rebuild trust, it starts here. Coleman's eyes met Alex's, and for a moment there was something unspoken between them. Respect, perhaps. Understanding. Finally, Coleman nodded. You're right, he said, and I'll make sure that's reflected in our decisions moving forward. After Coleman left, the team gathered near the counter, the tension in the air replaced by a cautious sense of relief. Ethan leaned against the sink, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. So, does this mean we're like heroes now? He asked, a nervous grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Sandra smirked. Let's not get carried away, kid. Liv laughed softly, shaking her head. Heroes or not, we did something good today. That has to count for something. It counts for a lot, Alex said, his voice firm. But we're not done. Not yet. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as corporate began their audit. Inspectors came and went, digging through files, questioning staff, and cataloguing the full extent of Chuck and Jake's misconduct. The team worked through it all, keeping the cafe running while navigating the changes that began to take shape. One evening after closing, Liv found Alex in the break room, poring over a stack of documents. Burning the midnight oil? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. Alex glanced up, offering a small smile. Just trying to stay ahead of things. Liv crossed her arms, studying him. You've been different lately. More focused. Like this isn't just about the cafe for you. Alex hesitated, the weight of her words pressing against him. He knew he couldn't keep his secret much longer, not when they'd come this far together. You're right, he said finally, his voice quiet. There's more to this than you know. Liv frowned, stepping closer. What do you mean? Alex took a deep breath, the truth spilling out before he could stop himself. I'm not just some barista trying to make ends meet. My name isn't Eli Winter. It's Alex Wyatt. I'm the owner of Harvest Grounds. The silence that followed was deafening. Liv stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment it seemed as though she might laugh, dismissing his words as some kind of joke. But the seriousness in his expression told her otherwise. You're kidding, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Alex shook his head. I wish I were. I came here to figure out what went wrong, to see it for myself. And I stayed because of you, because of this team. You're the reason I realized what I'd lost sight of. Liv's expression shifted from shock to something closer to anger. You've been lying to us this whole time. I didn't know how else to do it, Alex said, his voice steady but pleading. I needed to see the truth, and I couldn't have done it without you. Liv shook her head, stepping back. You should have told us. You should have trusted us. I'm trusting you now, Alex said, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Liv didn't respond, her gaze hard and unreadable as she turned and walked out of the room. Alex sat in the silence she left behind, the weight of his confession pressing down on him. He had hoped the truth would set things right, but it seemed it had only made things more complicated. Sandra snorted. If he tries, I'll be ready. Alex smiled faintly. We'll all be ready. The conversation was cut short as the door opened, and Coleman stepped back into the cafe. His usual air of authority was tempered by something softer, an acknowledgement, perhaps, of the team's efforts. Good evening, Coleman said, his tone measured. I wanted to thank you all for your cooperation today. What you've uncovered is significant. Sandra raised an eyebrow. Is that corporate speak for, you were right? Coleman's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. It's corporate speak for, you've made a difference. And we intend to follow through. Liv leaned forward, her voice cautious. What does that mean exactly? It means there will be changes, Coleman said. We're conducting a full audit of all regional operations. Chuck and Jake's actions have likely impacted more locations than just this one. You've exposed a systemic issue, and for that, we're grateful. But what about us? Sandra pressed. What happens to this cafe? To our jobs? Coleman hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the group. That's part of why I'm here. We're appointing a new regional manager to oversee operations, and there will be some temporary restructuring. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise it will be fair. Sandra didn't look entirely convinced, but Liv gave a small nod. Fair's a good start. More than fair, Alex said, his voice steady. This team deserves recognition for what they've endured and what they've accomplished. They've kept this place running despite everything. If corporate wants to rebuild trust, it starts here. Coleman's eyes met Alex's, and for a moment there was something unspoken between them. Respect, perhaps. Understanding. Finally, Coleman nodded. You're right, he said, and I'll make sure that's reflected in our decisions moving forward. After Coleman left, the team gathered near the counter, the tension in the air replaced by a cautious sense of relief. Ethan leaned against the sink, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. So, does this mean we're like heroes now? He asked, a nervous grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Sandra smirked. Let's not get carried away, kid. Liv laughed softly, shaking her head. Heroes or not, we did something good today. That has to count for something. It counts for a lot, Alex said, his voice firm, but we're not done. Not yet. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as corporate began their audit. Inspectors came and went, digging through files, questioning staff, and cataloguing the full extent of Chuck and Jake's misconduct. The team worked through it all, keeping the cafe running while navigating the changes that began to take shape. One evening after closing, Liv found Alex in the break room, poring over a stack of documents. "Burning the midnight oil?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. Alex glanced up, offering a small smile. "Just trying to stay ahead of things." Liv crossed her arms, studying him. "You've been different lately. More focused. Like this isn't just about the cafe for you." Alex hesitated, the weight of her words pressing against him. He knew he couldn't keep his secret much longer, not when they'd come this far together. "You're right," he said finally, his voice quiet. "There's more to this than you know." Liv frowned, stepping closer. "What do you mean?" Alex took a deep breath, the truth spilling out before he could stop himself. "I'm not just some barista trying to make ends meet. My name isn't Eli Winter. It's Alex Wyatt. I'm the owner of Harvest Grounds." The silence that followed was deafening. Liv stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment it seemed as though she might laugh, dismissing his words as some kind of joke. But the seriousness in his expression told her otherwise. "You're kidding," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Alex shook his head. "I wish I were. I came here to figure out what went wrong, to see it for myself. And I stayed because of you, because of this team. You're the reason I realized what I'd lost sight of." Liv's expression shifted from shock to something closer to anger. "You've been lying to us this whole time." "I didn't know how else to do it," Alex said, his voice steady but pleading. "I needed to see the truth, and I couldn't have done it without you." Liv shook her head, stepping back. "You should have told us. You should have trusted us." "I'm trusting you now," Alex said, "and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Liv didn't respond, her gaze hard and unreadable as she turned and walked out of the room. Alex sat in the silence she left behind, the weight of his confession pressing down on him. He had hoped the truth would set things right, but it seemed it had only made things more complicated. And as the night stretched on, he couldn't help but wonder if he'd made the biggest mistake of all. The tension in the cafe the next morning was palpable. Alex arrived early, hoping to catch Liv before the day began, but she wasn't there. The espresso machine hummed softly, waiting for someone to bring it to life. He busied himself with small tasks, cleaning the counter, organizing cups, anything to keep his mind from replaying the look on her face when he'd revealed the truth. By the time the first rush hit, Liv still hadn't arrived. Sandra and Ethan handled the crowd with their usual efficiency, but Alex noticed the subtle shifts, the whispered glances, the quiet questions that passed between them when they thought he wasn't looking. Sandra finally cornered him during a lull. She leaned against the counter, her eyes narrowing. "All right, spill it. What's going on with you and Liv?" Alex hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "She's upset, and she has every right to be." Sandra crossed her arms. "Let me guess, you said something stupid." Alex let out a dry laugh. "Not exactly, I told her the truth." Sandra's expression shifted, a flicker of curiosity breaking through her usual tough demeanor. "The truth about what?" Alex glanced around, making sure they were alone. "About who I am, about why I'm really here." Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed again. "You mean you're not just some overqualified barista?" Alex took a deep breath. "I'm Alex Wyatt, the owner of Harvest Grounds." Sandra stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I were," Alex said quietly. "But it's the truth." Sandra's laughter faded, replaced by a hard edge. "So, you've been lying to us this whole time? Playing the undercover boss or whatever?" "It wasn't about playing anything," Alex said, his voice steady. I needed to understand what was happening here. What I saw from corporate didn't make sense. I came here to figure it out, and I stayed because of all of you. Sandra shook her head, her arms tightening across her chest. Do you have any idea how messed up that is? You've been pretending to be one of us while sitting on a fortune. Do you even know what it's like to struggle like we do? Alex's jaw tightened. I came here to learn exactly that. And because of you, because of Liv, Ethan, and everyone else, I finally understand. That's why I'm fighting for this place, for all of you. Sandra studied him for a long moment, her sharp gaze cutting through him like glass. Finally, she let out a heavy sigh. You're lucky you're convincing, Winter, or Wyatt, or whatever your name is. Alex allowed himself a small, humorless smile. Thanks, Sandra, I think. She shook her head again, but her voice softened slightly. Don't thank me yet. Liv's the one you need to win over. She's the heart of this place, whether she realizes it or not. Alex nodded, the weight of her words settling over him. I'll make it right. I have to. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity, but Alex's thoughts remained fixed on Liv. She finally arrived in the late afternoon, slipping into the cafe with a quietness that was uncharacteristic for her. She avoided his gaze, keeping her head down as she moved through her tasks with mechanical precision. It wasn't until the cafe closed that Alex found an opportunity to speak with her. He caught her in the break room, her back to him as she cleaned the sink. Liv, he said softly, his voice hesitant. She froze for a moment, her shoulders tensing. Then she turned, her expression guarded. What do you want, Alex? Or should I say Mr. Wyatt? Alex, he said, his tone gentle. Please. Liv crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. Fine. What do you want, Alex? I want to apologize, he said, stepping closer. For lying, for not trusting you sooner. You have every right to be angry. You're damn right I'm angry, Liv said, her voice rising. You let us think you were one of us, someone just trying to make ends meet. But the whole time, you were… What? Spying? Judging us? It wasn't like that, Alex said, his voice steady but pleading. I came here because I didn't know what else to do. I needed to see the truth, not just the numbers, but the people behind them. And what I found was more than I ever expected. Liv's eyes flashed, her voice sharp. And what did you find, Alex? That we're just pawns in some corporate game? That you can swoop in and save us because you're the big boss? I found a team that cares more about this place than anyone at corporate ever has, Alex said, his voice firm. I found people who deserve better, who've been carrying this cafe on their shoulders while Chuck and Jake bled it dry. And I found you, Liv, someone who refuses to give up no matter how hard it gets. Liv's expression faltered, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her anger. You think flattery is going to fix this? No, Alex said, but the truth might. Everything I've done here has been because of you, because of this team. I don't want to save this place for corporate. I want to save it for you, for all of us. The silence that followed was heavy, the weight of his words hanging in the air between them. Liv looked away, her jaw tight, her arms still crossed. Finally, she let out a sigh, her voice soft. You don't make this easy, you know that? Alex allowed himself a small smile. I've been told that before. Liv shook her head, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. You're lucky I'm too tired to stay mad. Does that mean you forgive me? Alex asked, his voice tinged with hope. Liv met his gaze, her expression softening. It means I'm willing to give you a chance to prove you're not just another suit. Alex nodded, relief washing over him. I'll take it, and I won't let you down. The moment felt fragile, but it was a start. As Liv left the break room, Alex felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had made mistakes, big ones, but he still had a chance to set things right. and he wasn't going to waste it. The next morning, Alex arrived at the cafe before dawn, the streets of the city still quiet under a heavy blanket of fog. The hum of the espresso machine and the faint glow of the overhead lights greeted him as he stepped inside. He dropped his bag near the counter, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. Today, everything would begin to change, or fall apart entirely. He moved behind the counter, starting the morning prep with deliberate care. Liv hadn't arrived yet, and though she'd said she was willing to give him a chance, Alex knew it would take more than words to rebuild her trust. She was the linchpin of the team, the one everyone looked to for guidance, even if she didn't realize it. Winning her over wasn't just personal, it was critical. The door chimed as Sandra walked in, her usual swagger tempered by curiosity. She glanced around the quiet cafe before fixing her sharp gaze on Alex. "Early start, huh?" she said, tossing her bag onto a nearby chair. "Wanted to get ahead of the day," Alex replied, adjusting the grinder. Sandra smirked, leaning against the counter. "Or maybe you're trying to avoid Liv?" Alex shot her a look, but Sandra just laughed. "Relax, she'll come around. Liv's tough, but she's not heartless." "Thanks for the insight, Doctor." "Sandra," Alex said dryly, though he couldn't help but smile. Sandra waved him off, moving to organize the pastries. "Just trying to keep things interesting." By the time Liv arrived, the cafe had begun to stir with the first wave of customers. She walked in with her usual efficiency, her face unreadable as she slipped behind the counter and began setting up. Alex watched her for a moment, then forced himself to focus on the orders piling up. The morning rush hit like a storm, and the team moved with practiced precision. Orders flew across the counter, espresso steamed and frothed, and the sound of laughter and chatter filled the air. But even in the chaos, Alex couldn't shake the weight of what was coming. It wasn't long before Coleman arrived, his presence commanding immediate attention. He strode into the cafe with purpose, a briefcase in hand and a determined look on his face. The team exchanged uneasy glances as he approached the counter. "Good morning," Coleman said, his tone brisk but polite. "I'd like to meet with the team when you have a moment." Liv stepped forward, her expression calm but wary. "We're in the middle of the rush, but we can take a break in about 20 minutes. "Perfect," Coleman said. "I'll wait." The rush continued, but the mood had shifted. Customers came and went, oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. When the line finally thinned, Alex joined Liv, Sandra, and Ethan in the break room, where Coleman stood waiting. "Thank you all for taking the time to meet," Coleman began, his voice measured. "As you know, we've been conducting a thorough investigation into the issues at this location and others in the region. The findings have been significant." Sandra crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "Significant how? Does this mean we're finally getting some real changes around here?" Coleman nodded. "Yes. Jake and Chuck's actions have caused widespread damage, but thanks to the evidence you've provided, we've been able to identify the root causes and take corrective measures." Ethan spoke up, his voice hesitant. "What kind of measures?" "Chuck Rollins has been terminated, effective immediately," Coleman said, "and Jake Chambers will face legal consequences for his actions. In the meantime, we'll be appointing a new regional manager to oversee operations." Sandra leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smirk on her face. "Good riddance." Coleman continued, his gaze sweeping over the group. "However, there's still work to be done. This cafe has been through a lot, and rebuilding trust, both internally and with your customers, will take time. That's why we're implementing a new management structure, one that prioritizes collaboration and transparency." Liv raised an eyebrow. "And what does that mean for us?" "It means your input will be critical moving forward," Coleman said. We want to ensure that every team member has a voice. And to start, we'll be hosting a town hall next week to discuss your ideas for improving the cafe. The team exchanged surprised glances. Sandra was the first to speak. Well, that's a first. Corporate actually listening to us? Coleman offered a faint smile. It's long overdue. The meeting ended on a cautiously optimistic note, but Alex could feel the lingering unease in the air. As the others filed out, he lingered behind, catching Coleman's attention. "Mr. Coleman," Alex began, his voice quiet, "I need to ask you something." Coleman turned, his expression curious. "Of course. What is it?" Alex hesitated, then took a deep breath. "What happens to this cafe if things don't improve? If corporate decides it's not worth saving?" Coleman's gaze softened, and for a moment he looked less like a corporate executive and more like someone who understood the stakes. "That's not the goal, Alex. We're here to fix what's broken, not abandon it." "But you can't guarantee that, can you?" Alex pressed. Coleman sighed. "No, I can't. But I can promise you this. As long as this team is willing to fight for this place, so am I." It wasn't the answer Alex had hoped for, but it was enough for now. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but Alex couldn't shake the weight of Coleman's words. The cafe's future was uncertain, and the responsibility of ensuring its survival felt heavier than ever. As the sun set, Alex found Liv cleaning the counter, her movements slow and deliberate. He approached her cautiously, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Liv," he said quietly, "can we talk?" She paused, glancing at him before nodding. "All right." Alex sat across from her, his expression earnest. "I meant what I said before. I'm here because of you, because of this team. I know I've made mistakes, but I want to make it right." Liv studied him for a long moment, her gaze steady. "You've got a lot to prove, Alex, but I'm willing to see if you can." "Thank you," Alex said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I won't let you down." The two sat in silence for a while, the weight of the day finally beginning to lift. For the first time in weeks, Alex felt a glimmer of hope, not just for the cafe, but for the people who had become his family. And as the lights dimmed and the doors locked, he knew the fight wasn't over. But together, they were ready to face whatever came next. The morning of the town hall brought a sense of anticipation that hung heavy in the air. Alex arrived before dawn, the quiet streets cloaked in a soft haze of fog. The cafe was still, save for the low hum of the espresso machine waiting to be put to work. Alex paused at the counter, letting the weight of the day ahead sink in. This wasn't just another meeting. It was a pivotal moment for the cafe and everyone who called it home. He busied himself with preparations, rearranging chairs and wiping down surfaces. The projector Sandra had insisted they borrow sat at the front of the room, a symbol of the team's determination to make their voices heard. Regular customers filtered in, their usual chatter subdued as they watched the team set up with quiet curiosity. Sandra was the first of the staff to arrive, her confident stride betraying an undercurrent of curiosity. She dropped her bag onto a nearby chair, her eyes sweeping the room. "Already getting things in order?" she teased, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Just trying to stay ahead of the chaos," Alex replied, tightening the knob on the coffee grinder. Sandra leaned on the counter, crossing her arms. "You think Liv's going to show up? Or is she still deciding whether to trust you?" Alex exhaled, glancing toward the door. "She'll be here. She always shows up when it matters." "Hope you're right," Sandra said, pushing herself off the counter and heading toward the pastry display. "Because today, it matters." When Liv arrived, she was all business, slipping behind the counter without so much as a glance at Alex. Her movements were efficient, her face composed, but Alex caught the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched tighter than usual around the cups she stacked. Coleman and Rivera arrived soon after, accompanied by a third corporate representative, a man whose stern demeanor made the air seem heavier. The corporate trio settled near the front, their expressions as unreadable as ever. Coleman offered a polite nod to Alex, but Rivera's sharp gaze darted over the room, missing nothing. As the cafe filled with both staff and a handful of loyal customers invited to speak, Alex took his place near the counter. He exchanged a brief glance with Liv, her nod steadying him. He stepped forward, clearing his throat to begin. "Thank you all for being here," Alex began, his voice carrying over the quiet murmur of the room. "This cafe isn't just a business. It's a community, and that community is only as strong as the people who make it. This team has faced challenges that would have broken anyone else, but they're still standing. Today is about ensuring we don't just survive, but thrive." Sandra was the first to speak. She stood tall, her voice carrying the strength of someone who had spent years weathering storms. "One of our biggest issues is communication. We're constantly playing catch-up because we don't have a clear system for sharing information. We need a platform that keeps everyone on the same page. Maintenance issues, scheduling changes, customer complaints, all of it." Coleman leaned forward, taking notes as Sandra spoke. "A centralized communication system could address a lot of those issues. We'll look into options." Ethan followed, his nervous energy channeling into a quiet but determined tone. "Cross-training would make a big difference too. If more of us knew how to handle different roles, we'd be able to cover for each other without everything falling apart when someone's out." As the suggestions rolled in, the energy in the room shifted. Liv proposed seasonal menu updates to keep offerings fresh and attract more customers. Sandra added the idea of a loyalty program to reward regulars. Even the invited customers shared insights about what kept them coming back, or what sometimes drove them away. It was a dynamic exchange, ideas building on each other, momentum growing. But the atmosphere abruptly shifted when the door swung open and Jake marched in, his face flushed with anger. His sudden appearance silenced the room, his presence like a storm cloud darkening a sunny day. "What is this circus?" Jake demanded, his voice booming. "Is this what you call fixing things, sitting around and complaining?" Coleman rose from his chair, his tone firm and unyielding. "Mr. Chambers, you're no longer part of this organization. You have no authority here." Jake ignored him, his eyes zeroing in on Alex. This is your doing. You think you can come in here and undo everything I built?" Alex stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "What you built was a house of exploitation and lies. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed." Jake sneered, his anger rising. "You're just another corporate puppet. You don't care about this place. You're just trying to make yourself look good." "This isn't about me," Alex shot back, his voice firm. "It's about the people you used and ignored. It's about fixing the damage you caused. And whether you like it or not, that's exactly what we're going to do." Before the confrontation could escalate further, Rivera stepped in, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Mr. Chambers, leave now, or I'll call security to escort you out." Jake hesitated, his gaze flicking between Alex and Coleman. For a moment it looked like he might lash out, but instead he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was thick with tension, but Coleman quickly refocused the room. "As I was saying, this cafe has a future worth fighting for. Your ideas today have shown that. Let's channel that energy into real change." The meeting continued, and as it wound down, the mood shifted again, this time toward hope. People lingered, exchanging ideas and stories, the weight of Jake's presence finally lifting. As the room began to clear, Alex found Liv near the counter, wiping down a tray. He approached carefully, unsure of where they stood after the events of the day. "You did good," Liv said without looking up. "Thanks," Alex replied, relief softening his voice. "But I couldn't have done it without you." Liv finally met his gaze, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "Just don't make me regret giving you another chance." "I won't," Alex said firmly. "Not this time." For the first time in weeks, Alex felt like they had turned a corner, not just as a team, but as a community. The fight wasn't over, but the path ahead felt clearer. Together, they could rebuild the cafe into something better than it had ever been.